Every scar tells a story, and every story carries an echo of the pain that forged it into reality. Join us as we explore the incredible resilience of the human spirit through stunning visuals and moving narratives. Click subscribe now and stay connected to the stories that touch the soul.
The door to conference room didn't slam. That was the part that serpents most. It just clicked shut. Soft and final, like someone's closing a book they read a bit already. Tat was his thing. The curator had talked. The more dangerous it was, effective is of Tevis, of today, we're moving in a different direction with the region for now Sleal's leadership. Just Wade. Like Hayes was ordering coffee. I'm Wade Calloway. 51 years old. And I'd just been let go in a room full of 414 people. What been pain? You could feel everyone in that room doing the math, trying to figure out where to look. Some stared at their laptops, some stared at their laptops. One guy I'd trained personally a kid named Tyler, Furish out of Ojali. Kid named Tyler, Furish out of Oja, for each of Ohio State when I heard him. Now a senior Askiont manager into an distinct study on the senior extent. Per invering and arresting to pounce some veers into study in line. Kevin. Meeden pie free, Isis Thether. He was 33. Promoted from outstrive 8s, Romit have reign of weights, mine have outside. Go as chief revenue officer. Before Hartwell Medical Supply, he was spent 2 years a combined fire poral and 1 risical suplake. Crant 2 years a fine and fire and 1 rid tech startup that folded. His intoidance fire fear could fit in pie feral. His intoy fee mug, mon filled 3 filling cabinets. I felt heat crawling up the back of my neck. Not anger, exactly. More like recognition. I'd seen this movie before. New Iksuti Tav comps when in bear. So I did. What 26 years and paced tickle seats as it age. Heats as you do to when a nokin and montralis. A negotiation isn't going your way. I took a breath. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. And I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. And I said, thanks for the flow, Sissid. Thank for the opportunity. And I mean that. 3 people in that room physically flinched. And I mean that. 3 people in that room physically flinched. Kevin looked up for the first time, just for a second, and I caught seeing his face thinking his in his face. I recognizing in his face I recognize. Confusion. Been expecting a scene. Confusion expecting a skin. In the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the brushed steel doors, 51 years old. Silver at the temples, face of a man warging more mills calling on hospital systems and specialty practices than he could count, started as a territory rip in Rorulia Credia in my late 20s. Back when Fikes machinins were still how you sent in orders. Bieltis company suverts. Bier region prachentically skluvergen prachentically from nothing hing Siri. From nothing hing, Bier weave it into the highest producing region in the component. From 7 of the last years. Bu chivi id had a visitchin. And his visitchin, apparently, did hand include Peter me. What is quile? Didn't nobody in that cone. What nobody in that conference room kenned. Conference room. Well, was that I'd spent the last 3 years berry curing quiet, preparing for exactly this polizabizity. Not because I spent the last 3 years very kunspicken preparing for exactly this polizabizily. Not because I come, because after 26 years, you learn some netting nobody puts in the Embly handbook. Relationships belong to her. Relationships belong to you. The company pays your salary. The company pays your salary. The silence choose you. And I'm pays you tickle distribution and specialty supply. The silites inside bleed relate relations. His ships with over more than his temp with 4 more fan at the cade. There wants just assistants on a spreadsheet. People wost office managers knew my wife's name. People dose sent flowers when my father passed. Let my path up and tell you how a 33-year-old with a linked premium ace count treenin can't tried to sideline me. and how I ended up signing a deal worth $100 million and with his biggest competitor before the $180 million and with his biggest competitor before the quarter was over. He'd been a pharmacist for over 30 years in Macon, Georgia. Small independent furnia, the quand ordia na fortizest, the kind that extrally knew your name and kept your medical history in apply. In a profile. When the bigry steesh squeezing out the independence on the late 9 times. I Mike stood him scrambled to compete on prishing and servant inventory in ways the course never had to worry a bonds. That's where I learned. Learns dismissed the relationship with the supplier can make or break everything. That's best supplier can make or break everything. Dad's best supplier required rude move montines to get him on in Regency. Shipperman. His worst owns would put him in a coup and tell him to wait. Completely different outcome. So when I took a job at Hartwell Medical Supply in my thircal soup pell, in my 30s, I wasn't just selling product. I was building the kind of relationships my father. I was building the kind of relations hips my father always wise turd he plain of replacing. I made to myself the person I called first, not the ataro for Miss Reps. Over 11 years, I biled the solacinthiest regin into Hartwell's crown G-Dwill, Turley's crown Geobla, 35 ways Teobal have pitchets, system is a jix ice 8 specialty praxisons is dolzent long-term carenet spanning forts, a combat annual perching volume in correts spanning 4 and 2. I also had a team of 7 reps as the regrited, trained, and mentored. Most of them had com 7 Q. Mace Corey's degrees no medical industry ex-mady agrees experience. ID, tease them how to talk to purchasing directors, how to handle a formula change emergency, how to show up from a Farley Sanj. Kevin Hartwell were PowerPoint about streamlined regional Sturm, and centralids secures and centralids at AC Cowman management. The corredited for IDE for symbol, stop having expensive returns of region of patron. Dart your patient Caffins of region of directors and use data of outreach and use dart of outreach to Hullets and Straven. A CRM dashboard that could supposedly replete what a senior relationship manager did. But a fraction of the cost the earth count. I SATA through that presentation and did say award. Not because I agreed. Because I can neurosomathing can it. The Sility is talking about automating relations where humans worked in industries where commence ever health, where a wrong shipperman couldn't cabit affect paying care. They did not want in where its spines. They wanted a person to wear cats, and a CEO. A good man named Thomas Dubbas I'd actually respected. Had rhetorically respected Hadrid Science months earlier. The new CEO came from Private Abody and was very excited about Kamas from Pirave Inwasti and was very excited about Kevin's Coast Retreat projections. After the boardroom, I sat in my car in the parting minutes. My one started busying immediately. First text was from Renata Souza, my Topra Spiginata. My Topri, 29 years old, Brazilian-American, biology degree from the U de Frontia, Florida. The kind of Relentinarican, biology degree from the U de Furit. Of Florida, the kind of Relentilush work Edish Thingardia thing. I'd hair her 4 years ago and she'd ground into the best, pure relationship belir, I dear a 7 scene. Wade, what just happened? I'd heard from Tyler. Glenn was 44, former Army medic, had come into pharmaceals late and bur is quatsperine and meterpatical patients that the UN Europe still couldn't match. He just sent 3 question mark. And then macho. He just sent 3 question marks. And then my brother-in-law Paul called. Paul runs a medical device distribution company up in Charlotte. Being in the industry in the buns, being unboast as long as ass. I drove home and told my wife Sylvia what happened. W've been married 24 years. Essay has saying ha. There've 2 companies. One layoff in the 2008 crash, and the year of a to the Sertio, I thought as it of lat starting about starting my own business and the didn't. Tat was her. Not I'm sorry or that's terrible. Walk me 12 rough what you acutely have. 24 you wean sickly. Have to be a 4 years and she still canoe. Exactly what I need to hear. And what I had was this. 3 years earlier, when the company had first started making noises about resses roosted during the securing, the seals riggins, I'd had a long conversation with a panel who specialized in impol and Torney which specialized in impol and trade law. Not because I was planning anything. What show told me was something most people and sells never think about until it's too late. Customer relationships by themselves belong to the person by Cade, themselves belong to the person while them. Contact information in a company database is the company proprietor. View to rest, the report, the history. You can't transfer that with a cram migration. My non-compete agreement had expired Beeman had agreement farther 14 months ago. I'd not a kid. I had signed nothing. I also hadn't signed the renewal. They're sent around during Kevin's first month, buried in a package. At first month of birity, Dokabias a months their bira sent a losh. Their D is sent via Doikazajan. Most people on my team had clicked them though without reading. And then they called my attorney. And then Ed called my attorney. And then I called my attorney. SHEZ said simply, don't sign that. I hadn't. So when I told Sylvia what I had, I meant this. 26 wins. Years of industry relation 6. Years of industry relation 6. A non-compete that had lapsed it. Kano LADAG of every major AC count and the soliest. Their contract renewal dates, their pain points, their persic, and a met with that a deed been quietly, steadily building outside Hartwell for 3 years without ever answering and crossing any. It happened the way most real disasters happen, slowly and then all at once. Renata Sohn sent me a text on Wednesday morning. Kevin's assistant tried to connect them with the new centralized team. They hung up. Riverside Health System was Hartwell's third lair. I'd been working with their director of supply chain, a meticulous, no-nonsense woman named Carol Rahl, which I've found for 9 years. Since before the hospital had finished their last advances, their last expansion. Carol did not do centralist to Crusterl had finished their last to Camson. Carol had not do centralist to Brewstermer teams. Carol had her person. I was no longer her person at Hartwell. I hadn't called her yet, but she knew. By Thursday, Renato was sending me updates almost. By the horde sending me updates almost by the horde. 10:15 a.m. St. Upadzo. As Goyston Specialty Practice Group, asking we hudirf kindatwia rapisking, sivathada. As onstier. 11:40 a.m. Glenn just told me the Memorial Hospital Network in Birmingham called Correport and say they were making Plex collar port and say they want to discuss their contract. Reniball is in 6 weeks, 20:30 p.m. 2-3 ball is in 6 weeks, 20:30 p.m. Why they don't know what is in discuss when squarigum. I SAT and home office desk reading toast texts and felt cementing consplinicated. Not satisfaction, not exactly. More like watching something inevitable happen and wishing, a little happen and feed and wishing, a little that it had need to. There's where good silence. People WHO ran departments that kept his sapicit and praskitas funsenchinin. The dindindees roved rope and sreptas umbribin, woman named denies. Bearing pleasant. Very careful. Wade, here. How are you doing? How are you doing? W just wanted to check in. There's been some conversation about fration. There's been some conversation about whether the transition, about whether the trains could use some additional support from someone with your experience. I let her get thruff. Her more witchin. Consarangaman, 60 days, transition support for the new centralized Sturger. They were thinking Treles for Hunterlezed, a spront. They were thinking 12 Mefous. Denies, I said carefully. I appreciate the calls in. Can I asking to Raf? Fori Puliat, appreciate the call. Can I ask you can directly? Of course 8 of the call. Can I ask you and send that directly? Of course, eh? How many saft isolated in the last 3 days? A long one. Wade, I'm not really in a position to. I'm not asking to member as anyone. I'm asking to as anyone. I'm asking because if you're calling in about consofer. Clash relation shrits where went wailed on a company name. There were bill not euro build on years of showing up, being reliable and astrally understanding what these people need, and 12,000 a month for me to help someone else maintain them is not a number's not a number that reflect what your acts is. What you're actually asking me to do. What number would you consider? I toot about it what you asking me to do. What number would you consider? I took about it would it fring if be canson. This isn't about money. Kevison fired me in a room full of people I trained, publicly, without 30 seconds of private conversations course and of curvated conversation. After 11 years of bullying of quiling the region that has carred this nation, after ever them years of billeting the region that has carred this company so the fiats, and then her rolled out a plan that turbs my clotter relationships like their entries in a database. That's not a cultural fit, I sue. That's not a cultural fit, I sue. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of how this industry lay work. If Kevin wants to call me personally and have an honest conversation about what went wrong, I'd take that call. But I'm not coming back as a confec. A contractor to clean up a mess he meth. I teched her for calling up. A mess he made. I thanked her for calling and hundubbing. The thing was, and this is the part that people outside of Silver Seals never quite understand. I wasn't doing anything to Hartwell. Hartwell is experiencing the natural portal. Hartwell was experiencing the natural consequence of removing the person to 8 points, of removing the person to 8 Billy. Tat Monday, 6 days after being fired, I had coffee with my brother-in-law Paul. W meet at dinner W being going to 4 years. Halfway base Ben going to 4 years. Halfway be Ted Ween Atlanta and Charlotte. Wade H said before ID even opened the menu. WE, both now YW here. Powell's company, Meridian Medical Distribution, had been competing with Hartwell in the Sola Viets. Had been competing with Hartwell in the Sola Thest for 7 years. Smaller, leaner, privately healed. The never been able to crack the major hospital system is his accounts because the Tust his accounts were loyal to their reps, and the reps were loyal to Hartwell to first, and the reps were loyal to first. Or more AC securedly, they were loyal to May. Paul knew that. W just never said it out loud because I was imploded by the compression. Now I watched. Here's what I'm sent. Here's what I'm thinking. He said, not just you. W Pravdi, the infrastructure. The product line is the capital to scale. What's the revenue tell? What's the revenue tave? Folded Pete's P Caproc. He slid a folded peas of pobbed across the pear, across the fake of. I open it. The number at the top was a projected book of business bossin the pale. I open it. The number of the top was a projected book of business bossin the accidents he should court. I crit him over in the first 18 months. $180 million. I folded the paper back up and put it in my jacket pocket. Pa, I said, what about my people? He leaned back. Which on vec? Pew? They've calm. I want them taken care of. Competitive calm. Proud territory ownership. Known of this centralized management notion. Nonsense. Don't, he said. What else? I need a clean legal riva. My non-competitive lapse and it did. What else? I need a clean legal riva. My non-competitive lapse and I didn't read it. But I want everything airtight. And I want my attorney involved in any cladden a roots reacher skirtures so quarters and power not doing bing thing ding ang thing gray. Powell nodded. That's exactly how I want to do this. This was this calculation. He knew that my relationships were wars more to meritus, meritus in pan and than any marketing comparage. A war. You and your son Jake is 16. Alder 1, Markazi 1. Named him Abramefer grandfather, is a sopamorite gear geotech. That tuition is not the orbitoral. She is sick at me what my guts odd. That tuition is not theoretical. She asked, I said, bark at me what my guts said. I said bing, but Bakazi 1. Fit it vid bets errors were way the best acids had ragin haid be it bit in a dashboard. Puzzle is offering me the chance to bold submitten where the relationships of the point, not the probable, not the problem, and the security, i.e. fee and health of what I thought would happen, doubly happen WVD more tan fine. Sylvia looked at me fine. Then Cephia looked at me for a long moment. Then Seaside, you knew this day was coming for 3 years. You prepared for it. I call it my attorning. We'd worked together since my first job change a decacond earlier, and said caller branch knew my employment history inside it. I walked hard her through Hoffman, Horfer, Bram. She walked hard her the offer legal landscape. Non-compet, the roof the legal lane landscape. Trade skirts. We would not be taking any Hartwell proprietary day data, no Skarenic sports, no Internofter Dawson, Intersports, no Interothstem, nothing. Any unusual but solid. Kevin, Deether, Deeden to thou, or didn't care that your tet, nor compatis head lapsed. I think a someone was handling it. The second week, I reached out, personally, through my own mail and fernth, to the top 12 cantwells of Kansas I'd manic. I didn't pitch Meridian. Carol from Riverside. Heckled system called back in 4 hours. Said, Wade, I he yardyard. I heard you weren't there anymore. I didn't know what to do. Their secta Pluto. Their new setup. Nobody can tell me anything. I told her I now was Meridian. I told her I wasn't calling to pressure her. I told her I wanted her to now that if she ever wanted to talk about Opichians, I was there. She taid, Wade's there said, Wade, send me what you have. Talk about Puchins I want to ver committed tech week. That was the first one. Within 30 days. 8 of my former top 12 AC sounds had openin' sations when Meridian. Within 9 days, thevs of them had sonen Ferigen. The other 2 were Ian. The other 2 were in late stage. The Burbay. The other 2 were in late stage, negatuazen. The combined annual Pershing volume of those the Sykes AC sounds ones. Renata Cam over 3 weeks after I started. Called me on a Tunzi Tesneen and sad. Wade, I don't have a region of Bing and sad. Wade, I don't for aftern and war and worts for it. And more and what's left isn't what of side, is mort for tie sign what of far. And honestly aften heat, is mort's wide up for and beat. Can twabe 12 4 follow 2 weeks after better. Can 20 follow 2 weeks after that. 4 of the other 5 reps on my old team made the Sam call over the foe the fumun 2 mons. All of them cam to point, 2 month scams. All of them cam to Meridian. Not because I recrited them. I was careful about that. Very careful about that. Very careful about that. Very careful about that. Very careful. On my attorney advised. They came because they called the me and of where. And I told them honestly what I was building. The day that hit me hardest came about 6 weeks after I left Hartwell. My doorbell rang on a sick Hartwell. My doorbell rang on a seconder duroker morning. Sylvia came and found me in the garage where bear warning. Where I'd been going foul Phil is Wade Sepum one tort well Phil's. IT was Kevin quietis. In cans in a pulver, looking like someone who'd not slept a full night in a month, hit a griven from Trum downtown. I could to tell by the parking garage ticket still sticking. I riven from downtown. I could tell by the parking garage ticket still sticking out of his shirt pocket. Talking into the kitchen. Sylvia made coffee and then quietly found some Weber Sato. B, which was a mercy. To be. Twist of mercy. Kevin sat down and didn't bother with her small talk. Wade, I need you to understand what's stuck with. Wade, I need you to understand what's happening. What's poured Minko of worst 4 major acetowns in 6 weeks. 2 more are on for Malrivi. The board is can questions. I don't have answers to. I said. He looked up. I'm not doing this to Hartwell. Everything that's happening is happening because Tass's Alliance trusted a person, and that person is no longer there. He was queued for our head for a moment. I know, he finally said. Hey Rupert, his face with both hands in the way that people do when they've the Sam Connors conversation too many time. It done 3 session too many 3. I done that in my car a few times in the past month too. Difference recent. Waynesway, is there any way all slow this down? Caverance. You bile the fart around the idea that relationships in this business can be sent to be sentenced. That what idea can be replicated by a seated by a suram and a full whole up seconds. Views had ECI's arts are worked for 11 years. They work in hospitals. They work in specialty practices. When something goes wrong with a shipment. Goes wrong with a shipment. Patient care is affected. They need a person. They're hers of. That's how this industry acts to relieve fund sessions. He was looking at the table. I can't slow down what's happening because I didn't spro. I camping because I didn't start it. You did when you made the decision that experience and relation sets 10 that experience and relation sets into the proc. Emily fit without hing ekthing anything Ely's caking Elyfig. I walked him to the door. There was a moment on the front porch where he looked like he might say something. Then he just nodded and walked into his car. I mocked him and go to his car. I mocked him go and felt, honestly, mostly sad. He wasn't a bad person. Heads was a mart person does been reward his war career for building modals and had never worked in Inferiorman where the modal broke down against reality. The full mall and Norseman come from Paul's office 9 weeks after I joined Meridian Medical Distribution Division, East Ablisha's East Division, East Ablisha's Recatrin, Hartwell's stock. They'd gone published 2 years earlier, drop it to rope at 11% a day, the news bro. Volume on the stock was 3 times the Phantomers. The press resati he was pursuing other appropriationist. Someone was been in the bird room. Told me later that the comment fub become bummater, that the conversation had been pernashati. Asa accounts shade iterated from me, +2 say found herself. Say's going to run her Ogen Tweaver in, within 3 years and WV both now it, called. Director of Materials Management. A man named George Horge with 4-6 years. And had 1 to 4 years and had 130 pinnet. Conversation. George said, Glenn, I've been waiting for this call. That's the thing about relation. Payul and I signed the formal partnership agreement on a Tuesday afternoon in his office in Charlotte. The total provers active book of business for the sore and the Solzius division. Slow enough to that folded pie sea of paper, hedgely across the diner table to feel like WB both don't work right. I'm 51 now, so work right. Heading into what could have been the back 9 of a corporate carrier managging someone as Semen, is sprayed and fighting for Buddigat. Walked around Forsyth Park one evening and she asked Ted how I felt. I told her, like I spent 11 years leaving years building something that someone elsewhere to get fret for. And now it's mine a grind, for a year and now it where. In the way it always should have been. Marcus, my son there's. His end it's hard from Sylvia, what had happened, the whole story. His asked, Dad, were you scared when they fired when they're dead? That's, how did you know to do that? Prepare like that, I mean. I thugged about that. Thugged about my father in his pharmacy watching the quorms move in. Tugget about the companies I seen restructure and's move in. Tugget about the companies I seen restructure and the people I dove vote. Because the one thing nobody tells you when you build something valuable for someone when this sells is that the value set the still partly lives in you. In what you know. In what you know some house. In the part they can't export to her. In the part they can't export to her. In the part they can export to the base F. And if you're centart, you protect the base F. And if you're smart, you protect that bobbies. Not to plan some revenge. Just because it's yours. Kevin called me on say, about 2 months after he left Hartwell. He's quilled Hartwell, he safted of W. Cole. He sees quilled, if Covey 12 fid, Garefi by Twend. Heretigeth. Dolping, near his new office. Need taken the tear his new office, the Caden taken the beer's dear of Vempus. Heb some harmed, in a way that felt genuine. It's sad. I thought it some relation seals relation Ashwitz were a parada. A variable I could opatinize around. I understand now that they were the Constantine. The Sheest. 2 cover sends to cover losses and brought in a new leadership team that, from what I hears, is doing the unsecumsturbium point cent. It's from what I hear is doing the unsex rework of horde of actually rebuilding cladding crowd relationships from the ground up. It'll take them years. It took me relevant to build what I gwilled. And I was good at. The reps WHU, the 2D and com to Carmaderdian, both landed W will. One went to Becom, one went to Bader on Quais computer in the last martyr 2. One went back into clinical work. They're fine. One went back into clinical work. It's not your quota. It's not your product knowledge. Toast matter. Thing that will prodict you way the company makes a dekincident that has nothing to do with how good you are. The thing that survives a resecond. The kind is that means Carol from Riverside. Health system calls back in 4 hours because CK knows you will never waste her time. Build that. Protect that. Now exactly what you build. And when someone fires you in a room full of people you trained, and you say thanks and button your jacket and walk out calm, that's not Tom, that's not W meekness. That's not even compenser. That's not even compenser. That's not even compenser. That's someone wishkin knew dot. I know some hithing you don't. I can, knew enough. And thanks to Kevin Hartwell making the most expensive mistake of his career, I got to find out just how much that knowing was worth. Turns out, quite a bit. People ask me sometimes if I planned all of it. Like I sat in some dark room for 3 years running a revenge simulation. That's not what happened. What happened is simpler and, I think, more honest than that. I watched, I paid attention, and I prepared, not out of anger but out of self-respect. When Kevin walked into that building with his restructuring slides and his certainty that relationships were a variable you could optimize around, he wasn't doing anything unusual. People make that mistake all the time in business. They look at a number on a spreadsheet, $160 million in regional revenue, and they think the number belongs to the company. They don't stop to ask where the number actually comes from. Who built it? What it's really made of. What it's really made of. What I built over 11 years wasn't a territory. It was trust. It was Carol at Riverside Health calling me on a Saturday because she knew I'd pick up. It was Glenn sitting across from George in Birmingham for 6 years, until George didn't just know Glenn's name, he knew what Glenn would do before the situation even happened. You can't migrate that to a new CRM. You can't automate it with a follow-up sequence. It lives in the space between 2 people who have shown up for each other consistently over time. That's not sentiment, that's the actual product. Kevin just never understood that. Here's the thing about consequences, though. They're not punishment, they're just physics. When you remove the person who built the relationships and replace them with a system that doesn't know the client's names, the clients don't stay out of loyalty to the company. They stay because of the relationship, and when the relationship is gone, so are they. That's not something I did to Hartwell. That's something Kevin set in motion the day he signed off on that restructuring plan. What I did, and I want to be clear about this because I think it matters, was prepare and then stay clean. My attorney reviewed everything. I didn't take a single piece of data from Hartwell systems. I didn't call clients while I was employed there. I didn't recruit my team. I just built something solid, protected what was legitimately mine, and waited to see what the situation called for. The intelligence part was understanding that my value wasn't in my title. It was in what I knew and who trusted me. The ethics part was making sure I never crossed a line to protect that value. No gray areas, no shortcuts. And the resilience part, that was the 15 minutes I sat in a parking garage feeling scared, and then deciding I'd done the work and I was going to trust it. Renata knew that. The morning she called me and said she didn't recognize what was left of the place. She wasn't just changing jobs. She was making a judgment about what kind of career she wanted and who she trusted to help her build it. I didn't take that lightly then. I don't take it lightly now. Sylvia asked me once, after everything settled, if I felt bad about what happened to Hartwell. I sat with that for a while, honestly. I felt bad for the people who got caught in it, the reps who had to scramble, the clients who spent weeks without a real point of contact. That part was real, and it wasn't nothing. But no, I didn't feel bad about protecting what I'd built. Because here's what I've learned after 26 years, nobody is going to protect your value for you. Not the company. Not your manager. Not the HR director calling to offer you $12,000 a month to fix a mess they made. You have to know what you've built, understand what belongs to you, and be ready to stand behind it, cleanly, ethically, with your head up. That "thanks" I said when Kevin fired me, I meant every word of it.